There was this kid in school who nobody really noticed. His name was Kian, and he was 17 years old. You asked anyone in his class to describe him. They would probably pause for a moment and then say something like, "Oh yeah, that quiet one who sits in the back." That was the thing about Kian. He had somehow figured out how to exist without being seen. Walked through the hallways with his head slightly down and his shoulders a little hunched, like he was trying to take up as little space as possible. He never raised his hand in class, even when he knew the answer. He never joined any clubs or sports teams, never got into trouble, and he never did anything that would make people remember him. Teachers would sometimes forget to call his name during attendance, and he never corrected them. He just sat there in silence, letting the moment pass like it did not matter, and maybe to him it really did not. Kian lived with his mother in a small apartment on the third floor of an old building. The elevator had been broken for as long as he could remember, so they always took the stairs. The walls were thin, and you could hear the neighbors arguing or laughing or watching television at all hours. His mother worked 2 jobs, one at a grocery store during the day and another cleaning offices at night. She left before he woke up most mornings and came home after he was already in bed. They communicated through notes left on the kitchen counter. Things like, "There is food in the fridge," or "I will be home late tonight," or "I love you." Kian kept every single one of those notes in a shoebox under his bed. He never told her that in his room there was not much. A small bed pushed against the wall, a desk covered with school books. He barely opened a window that looked out onto a brick wall, and in the corner, sitting on a plastic stand, was a keyboard. It was old and missing a few keys. The letter B did not work, and neither did the high F sharp. Someone had left it outside their building one day with a sign that said "free," and Kian had carried it up 3 flights of stairs by himself. That was 6 years ago. He was 11 at the time. He did not know how to play a single note, but something about that keyboard called to him. Maybe it was the idea that music could say the things he could not. Maybe it was the feeling of pressing a key and hearing a sound that belonged only to him. Or maybe he was just lonely and needed something to fill the silence. Whatever the reason, Kian started teaching himself to play. He watched videos online for hours. He paused and rewound and played the same 10 seconds over and over again until his fingers memorized the movements. Borrowed books from the library about music theory and chord progressions. He practiced scales until his hands ached, and slowly, day by day, month by month, year by year, he got better. But he never told anyone. Not his mother, not his classmates, not a single person in the world knew that this quiet, invisible boy could play piano like his life depended on it. At school, Kian was a ghost. He ate lunch alone near the back entrance, where nobody really went sometimes. He brought a sandwich from home, and sometimes he just sat there with nothing, pretending he was not hungry. He watched the other kids from a distance, the athletes laughing and throwing things at each other, the popular girls taking photos and talking about parties, the theater kids rehearsing lines in dramatic voices. Everyone seemed to belong somewhere. Everyone except him. He wondered sometimes what it would feel like to be part of something, to have people call your name across the hallway, to be missed when you were absent. But those thoughts never lasted long. He had learned a long time ago that wishing for things did not make them happen, so he stopped wishing. There was a girl in his history class who sat 2 rows ahead of him. She had curly hair and always wore bright colors. One day she dropped her pen and it rolled all the way back to his desk. He picked it up and handed it to her without saying a word. She smiled and said, "That was it." That was the longest interaction he had with anyone at school in weeks. He replayed that moment in his head more times than he wanted to admit, not because he liked her, but because someone had seen him, someone had looked at him and spoken to him like he was a real person. And that feeling was rare enough to be worth remembering. After school, Kian always went straight home. He did not hang out with friends because he did not have He did not go to the mall or the movies or the park. He climbed the 3 flights of stairs and unlocked the door and dropped his bag by the entrance. Then he walked to his room and sat down at the keyboard, and everything changed when Kian played. The piano, he was not invisible anymore. He was not quiet or awkward or forgettable. He was powerful. The music poured out of him like water breaking through a dam. He played classical pieces he had learned from online tutorials. He played pop songs he heard on the radio. He played his own compositions that he made up as he went along. Sometimes he played with his eyes closed, feeling each note vibrate through his fingertips. Sometimes he played so loud that the neighbors banged on the wall and he had to stop. But even then he did not mind, because for those few hours every day he was exactly who he wanted to be. His mother had no idea how good he had become. She knew he had the keyboard, of course. She had seen him tinkering with it when he was younger, but she worked so much and was so tired when she came home that she never really heard him play, and Kian never played when she was around. He was afraid she would tell him to focus on school instead. He was afraid she would say that music was not a real career. He was afraid she would look at him differently, so he kept it a secret, just like he kept everything else. There was one night he would never forget. It was a Thursday, and his mother had come home earlier than usual. She had gotten sick at work, and her boss sent her home. Kian did not know this. He was in his room playing a piece he had been working on for months. It was Chopin, one of the most difficult ballades ever written. His fingers moved across the keys with speed and precision. The Towistes melody rose and fell like waves crashing against the shore. He was so lost in the music that he did not hear the front door open. He did not hear his mother take off her shoes. He did not hear her walk slowly down the hallway toward his room. But when the piece ended and the last note faded into silence, he heard something else. He heard crying. He turned around and saw his mother standing in the doorway with tears streaming down her face. She was holding one hand over her mouth like she was trying to keep the sobs from escaping. Kian froze. He did not know what to say. He did not know if she was angry or sad or disappointed. But then she walked toward him and wrapped her arms around him and held him tight, and through her tears she whispered something he would carry with him for the rest of his life. She said, "I had no idea. I had no idea you had this inside you." Kian cried too. The first time in years, he let himself cry, not because he was sad, but because someone finally saw him, someone finally heard him, and that someone was the person who mattered most. They stayed like that for a long time, mother and son holding each other in a tiny room with a broken keyboard and thin walls, and in that moment nothing else mattered, not the long hours or the empty hallways or the invisibility he wore like armor, just the music and the love and the feeling that maybe, just maybe, he was not as alone as he thought. After that night, something shifted between Kian and his mother. They did not talk about it directly, because that was not how they worked, but there was a new understanding between Thema, warmth that had not been there before. She started leaving different kinds of notes on the kitchen counter, notes that said things like, "Play something beautiful today," or "Your music makes this apartment feel like home." Kian kept those notes too. He added them to the shoebox under his bed with all the others. But even though his mother now knew about his talent, Kian still kept it hidden from everyone else. School remained the same. He was still the quiet one in the back of the room, still the boy nobody noticed, still invisible, and he was okay with that, or at least he told himself he was. The school year moved forward, and winter turned to spring. Posters started appearing in the hallways announcing the annual talent show. It was a big deal at this school. Students practiced for months. Parents came to watch. Local newspapers sometimes covered it. The winner got a small scholarship and the chance to perform at a city-wide event. Kian walked past those posters every day without giving them a second thought. The talent show was for people who wanted to be seen, people who craved attention and applause. That was not him. He had his keyboard at home, and that was enough. At least, that is what he believed. There was a senior named Devin who everyone expected to win. He had been playing piano since he was 5 years old, had won competitions and performed at recitals, and was already accepted to a famous music school on the other side of the country. When Devin played, the whole school stopped to listen. Teachers praised him and students admired him. He was everything Kian was not. Confident and talented and impossible to ignore. Kian had watched him perform once at a school assembly. Devin played a classical piece with perfect technique and dramatic flair. The audience gave him a standing ovation. Kian sat in the back row and clapped along with everyone else, but inside he felt something strange. It was not jealousy exactly. It was more like longing, a quiet voice in his head that whispered, "What if that was you?" He pushed that voice down and forgot about it too. Weeks before the talent show, something unexpected happened. Devin broke his wrist. It happened during a weekend trip. With friends, he was skateboarding down a hill and lost control and fell hard on the pavement. The doctor said he would need surgery and months of recovery. There was no way he could perform. The news spread through the school like wildfire. Everyone was talking about it. Music teacher was devastated. Her name was Mrs. Okafor, and she had been running the talent show for over a decade. Devin was supposed to be the highlight of the evening. Without him, there was a gap in the program that nobody else could fill. She spent days trying to find a replacement. She asked students from the music club. She reached out to kids who played instruments, but nobody was ready. Nobody had the skill to take Devin's place on such short notice. And then fate stepped in. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and the school was mostly empty. Kian had stayed late because he missed the bush, was wandering through the hallways waiting for his mother to finish work so she could pick him up. He passed by the auditorium and noticed the door was open. The lights were off, but the stage was lit by a single spotlight, and there in the center of the stage was a grand piano. Kian had never seen it up close before. It was beautiful, black and shiny and massive, nothing like the broken keyboard in his room. He looked around to make sure nobody was watching. Then he slipped inside and walked down the aisle toward the stage. His heart was beating fast. He climbed the steps and stood in front of the piano. He ran his fingers along the keys without pressing them. They were smooth and cool and perfect. He sat down on the bench and took a deep breath, and then he started to play. He chose a piece he had been practicing for over a year. It was Chopin's First Ballade, one of the most emotional and technically demanding pieces ever written. The music filled the empty auditorium. It echoed off the walls and wrapped around him like a blanket. He closed his eyes and let himself disappear into the notes. Forgot where he was. He forgot who he was. It was only the music. Minutes passed. Piece built and swelled and crashed and whispered. Kian played every note from memory. His fingers danced across the keys like they had done this 1,000 times because they had. When the final chord rang out, he let the silence settle. He sat there with his hands still on the keys, breathing slowly, and then he heard something that made his blood run cold. He heard applause, not a lot, just one person clapping. He spun around and saw Mrs. Okafor standing in the doorway at the back of the auditorium. She was staring at him with wide eyes and an open mouth. Kian jumped up from the bench like he had been caught stealing. His face turned red and his hands started shaking. He did not know what to say. He thought he was in trouble. He thought she would yell at him for being in the auditorium without permission. But she did not yell. She walked slowly down the aisle toward the stage. Her heels clicked against the floor with every step. When she reached the front row, she stopped and looked up at him. Her voice was soft. When she finally spoke, she asked him how long he had been playing. Kian could barely get the words out. He said 6 years. She asked him who taught him. He said nobody. She asked him why she had never heard him before. He did not have an answer for that. He just stood there looking at the floor, wishing he could vanish. Mrs. Okafor climbed the steps and stood next to him. She looked at the piano and then back at him. She told him that what she just heard was extraordinary. She told him that in all her years of teaching, she had rarely seen raw talent like his. She told him that he had a gift. Kian did not know how to respond. Nobody had ever said anything like that to him. Before he wanted to run, he wanted to hide. but something in her voice made him stay. Asked him one question. She asked if he would consider performing at the talent show. Kian felt his stomach drop. He shook his head immediately. He told her he could not do that. He told her he was not the kind of person who performed in front of crowds. He told her he was nobody. Mrs. Okafor did not argue with him. She did not push or pressure or demand. She simply reached into her bag and pulled out a piece of paper. It was the sign-up sheet for the talent show. She placed it on the piano and told him to think about it. She said the deadline was Friday. She said the choice was his and his alone. Then she turned and walked away. Kian stood on that stage for a long time. After she left, he looked at the sign-up sheet. He looked at the piano. He thought about all the years he had spent playing alone in his room. He thought about his mother crying in the doorway. He thought about the girl who smiled when he handed her the pen. He thought about Devin and the standing ovation and the voice that whispered, "What if?" For the first time in his life, Kian allowed himself to imagine something different. Imagined walking onto this stage in front of hundreds of people. He imagined sitting at this piano under this spotlight. He imagined playing his heart out and being heard. The thought terrified him, but it also made him feel something else. Something he had not felt in a very long time. It made him feel alive. He picked up the sign-up sheet and folded it carefully. He put it in his pocket and walked out of the auditorium. He did not know what he was going to do, but for the first time, he did not close the door on the possibility. He left it open, just a crack, just enough to let the light in. Kian did not sleep that night. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling with the sign-up sheet on his desk across the room. It felt like it was watching him, waiting for him to make a decision. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the auditorium. He saw the grand piano under the spotlight. He saw hundreds of empty seats that would soon be filled with real people. People who would look at him, people who would judge him, people who would finally see him. And that was the problem. He had spent his whole life learning how to be invisible. He had built walls around himself so high that nobody could climb over them. And now someone was asking him to tear those walls down in front of the entire school. They thought made his chest tight. It made his hands sweat. It made him want to crumple up that paper and throw it in the trash, but he did not do that. Instead, he got out of bed and walked to his keyboard, sat down in the darkness, and placed his fingers on the keys. He did not play anything. He just sat there feeling the cool plastic beneath his fingertips. He thought about how this instrument had saved him when his father left and his mother started working double shifts. This keyboard was there when kids at school ignored him and made him feel like he did not exist. This keyboard was there when the world felt too loud and too cruel and too confusing. This keyboard gave him a place to hide. But maybe hiding was not enough anymore. Maybe there was a difference between being safe and being alive. The next morning, Kian went to school with the sign-up sheet still in his pocket. He walked through the hallways like he always did, head down, shoulders hunched and visible, but something felt different. He was aware of things he had never noticed before. The way students laughed and talked and moved through the halls like they owned the place. The way teachers smiled at certain kids and ignored others. The way the world seemed to divide people into those who mattered and those who did not. Kian had always accepted his place in the second group, but now he was not so sure. During lunch, he sat in his usual spot near the back entrance, pulled the sign-up sheet from his pocket, and unfolded it. The paper was wrinkled from being held too many times. He read the words over and over again. Annual talent show sign up below. Headline. Friday there were already a dozen names on the list. Singers and dancers and comedians. People who wanted to be seen, people who were not afraid. Kian folded the paper and put it back in his pocket. He was not ready. Not yet. After school, he went to the music room. He told himself he was just going to look around. But deep down he knew he was hoping to see Mrs. Okafor. Was there grading papers at her desk. When he walked in, she looked up and smiled like she had been expecting him. She did not say anything at first. She just gestured to the chair across from her and waited for him to sit Down Kian sat, his leg bounced nervously under the desk. He did not know where to start, so Mrs. Okafor started for him. She told him about herself. She said that when she was young, she wanted to be a professional violinist. She practiced every single day for hours. She performed at recitals and competitions and dreamed of playing in famous concert halls around the world. But then something happened. She was 19 years old and performing at a big college showcase. Scouts and agents were in the audience. It was the most important night of her life, and she froze right there on stage in front of everyone. She forgot how to play. Her hands would not move. Her mind went blank. She stood there for what felt like forever while the audience watched in silence. Eventually, she walked off the stage and never performed again. Kian listened without saying a word. Could see the pain in her eyes, even after all these years. She told him that moment broke something inside her. She gave up on her dream and became a teacher. Instead, she said she loved teaching and she did not regret her life, but she always wondered what would have happened if she had tried again, if she had faced her fear instead of running from it. She looked at Kian and her voice grew softer. She told him she saw something in him that reminded her of herself. The talent was obvious, but so was the fear. She said she could not make him perform. She would never force anyone to do something they were not ready for, but she wanted him to know that hiding his gift was not protecting it, it was burying it. Buried things do not grow, they just disappear. Kian felt something crack inside his chest. It was like she had reached in and touched the part of him he kept locked away. He wanted to tell her everything, wanted to explain why he was so afraid, but the words got stuck in his throat. Instead, he asked her one question. He asked, "What if I fail?" Mrs. Okafor smiled. She said failure was not the opposite of success, it was part of it. She said every great musician had failed more times than they could count. The difference between those who made it and those who did not was simple. The ones who made it kept going. They did not let one bad moment define their whole life. Kian thought about that for a long time. He thanked her and left the music room, but her words stayed with him that night. He told his mother everything. They sat together at the small kitchen table with cups of tea that grew cold because neither of them drank. Kian told her about the auditorium, about Mrs. Okafor, finding him, about the talent show and the sign-up sheet. His mother listened without interrupting. When he finished, she reached across the table and took his hands in hers. She told him something he had never heard before. She told him about his father, not the angry parts or the sad parts. She told him about the beginning. She said his father used to play guitar. He was good too, really good. He played at small bars and coffee shops and dreamed of making it big one day. But life got hard and money got tight and he gave up. He stopped playing and started working jobs he hated. Slowly that bitterness ate him up from the inside. She said she always believed that giving up on music was what broke him, not the money problems, not the struggles, but losing the thing that made him feel alive. She looked at Kian with tears in her eyes. She told him she did not want the same thing to happen to her son. She said his music was a gift, not just for him, but for everyone who heard it. She said the world needed more beauty, and he had the power to create it. Kian felt the tears come. He did not try to stop them. His mother came around the table and held him the way she did when he was small. She whispered in his ear that she believed in him, that she had always believed in him, even when he did not believe in himself. The next morning was Friday, the deadline for the talent show. Kian woke up early and got dressed. He ate breakfast with his mother, who squeezed his hand before he left. He walked to school with the sign-up sheet in his pocket. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. He went straight to the music room. Mrs. Okafor was there arranging chairs for a class. She looked up when he walked in. He did not say anything. He just pulled the sheet from his pocket and placed it on her desk. She picked it up and saw his name written at the bottom. She smiled, not a big dramatic smile, just a small quiet one, like she had known all along this moment would come. She told him she was proud of him. She told him the rehearsal schedule would be posted next week. She told him she would be there every step of the way. Kian nodded and turned to leave. But before he reached the door, he stopped. He looked back at her and said something he had never said to anyone. He said, "Thank you for seeing me." Mrs. O'Coffer's eyes grew wet. She nodded slowly, and in that moment they both understood something. This was not just about a talent show. It was about a boy learning to believe he was worth seeing. It was about an old wound finally starting to heal. It was about the terrifying, beautiful act of letting yourself be. Nongkian walked out of the music room and into the crowded hallway. Students rushed past him like they always did. Nobody noticed him. Nobody looked twice, but something had changed. He was no longer hiding. He was preparing. In 10 days, he would walk onto that stage. In 10 days, he would sit at that piano. In 10 days, he would play for the first time in front of people who had never heard his name. And whatever happened after that, whether he succeeded or failed, whether they cheered or stayed silent, would finally know what it felt like to be brave. The countdown had begun. The 10 days passed like a fever dream. Sometimes they moved slowly, and Kian felt every second dragged by. Other times, they rushed past him, and he could not catch his breath. Practiced every single night until his fingers ached. He played the same piece over and over until he could perform it with his eyes closed. He rehearsed in the auditorium twice with Mrs. O'Coffer watching from the front row. She gave him small notes here and there. Slow down in this section. Let that note breathe a little longer. Trust yourself. He tried to absorb everything she told him, but the closer the talent show got, the more his fear grew. It was like a creature living inside his chest. Some days it was quiet, and he almost forgot it was there. Other days it roared so loud he could barely think. The night before the show, Kian could not eat dinner. His mother made his favorite meal, but he just pushed the food around his plate. She did not say anything. She understood before he went to bed. She handed him something wrapped in old newspaper. He opened it carefully and found a small wooden box inside. It was worn and scratched like it had been through a lot. She told him it belonged to his father. Inside was a guitar pick. Just a simple plastic pick with the edges worn down from years of use. She said his father kept it with him everywhere he went. It was his good luck charm. She wanted Kian to have it now. Kian held the pick in his palm and felt its weight. It was almost nothing, just a tiny piece of plastic, but it carried so much. He closed his fingers around it and thanked his mother. That night he slept with it under his pillow. The morning of the talent show arrived. Gray and cold rain tapped against the window like fingers drumming. Impatiently, Kian got dressed slowly. He put on his cleanest shirt and his only pair of nice pants. He looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the person staring back. His eyes looked tired. His face looked pale. But there was something else there, too. Something that had not been there before. It looked almost like Hope School. Felt different that day. The hallways buzzed with excitement about the show. Students talked about who they thought would win. Teachers reminded everyone to be respectful during performances. Posters hung on every wall announcing the event. Kian walked through it all like he was moving underwater. Everything seemed muffled and far away. He went to his classes but did not hear a single word the teacher said. His mind was somewhere else. It was on that stage, at that piano under that spotlight. During lunch, he did not eat. He sat in his usual spot near the back entrance and stared at nothing. His hands would not stop shaking. Kept reaching into his pocket to touch the guitar pick. It was still there. He was not alone. The final bell rang and students poured into the auditorium. Kian went backstage where the other performers were gathered. There were maybe 15 of them, singers warming up their voices, dancers stretching their legs, a high comedy group going over their routine one more time. Nobody talked to Kian. They did not know who he was. He stood in the corner by himself watching everyone else. He felt like an imposter. Like he did not belong here with these confident, talented people. Like someone was going to tap him on the shoulder and tell him there had been a mistake. Mrs. O'Coffer found him a few minutes before the show started. She could see the panic in his eyes. She put her hands on his shoulders and made him look at her. She told him to breathe, just breathe. She said the audience did not matter. The judges did not matter. The only thing that mattered was him and the piano. She told him to play like he played in his room, like nobody was watching, like the music was the only thing in the world. Kian nodded, but he was not sure he believed her. The show began. One by one, the performers took the stage. A girl sang a pop song, and the crowd clapped along. A group of boys did a hip-hop dance that got everyone cheering. A comedian told jokes that made people laugh so hard they cried. Each act was good, really good, and with every performance, Kian felt smaller. How could he compete with this? How could he, a nobody with a broken keyboard and no training, stand on the same stage as these people? His turn was coming. He was second to last. Act before him was a girl who played violin. She was incredible. Her music filled the auditorium and made people hold their breath. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. Then it was time. Kian heard his name called over the speakers. The sound hit him like a punch to the stomach. His legs did not want to move. His feet felt glued to the floor. But somehow he started walking. He pushed through the curtain and stepped onto the stage. Spotlight found him immediately. It was blinding. He could not see the audience. He could only see white light in the dark shape of the piano in front of him. He heard whispers ripple through the crowd. People were confused. They did not recognize him. Someone in the back said, "Who is that?" Someone else said, "I think he's in my math class." Kian walked to the piano and sat down on the bench. His hands were trembling so badly he had to press them flat against his legs. Looked out at the audience, but all he saw was a sea of shadows. Hundreds of people waiting, watching, judging. His mind went blank. He could not remember the first note. He could not remember any of the notes. The fear had swallowed everything. Seconds passed. They felt like hours. The audience started to shift uncomfortably. Someone coughed. Someone whispered. Kian felt the panic rising in his throat. He was going to fail. He was going to freeze just like Mrs. Okafor did all those years ago. He was going to walk off this stage and never come back. And then he felt something in his pocket, the guitar pick. He reached in and wrapped his fingers around it, and suddenly he was not alone anymore. He thought about his father who gave up on his dreams. Thought about his mother working 2 jobs and still leaving notes that said, "I love you." He thought about Mrs. Okafor, who saw something in him worth believing. And he thought about all those nights alone in his room playing for no one. And he realized something. He was not playing for the audience. He was not playing for the judges or the scholarship or the applause. He was playing for himself, for the boy who spent 6 years teaching himself piano on a broken keyboard, for the kid who ate lunch alone and walked through hallways like a ghost, for everyone who ever felt invisible and wondered if they mattered. Kian closed his eyes. He placed his fingers on the keys, and he began to play. The first notes came out soft and hesitant, but then something shifted. Music took over. His fingers moved on their own, finding the keys like old friends. The melody rose and filled the auditorium. It was a piece called Experience by a composer named Ludovico Einaudi. Started gentle and quiet like a whisper. Then it built slowly, growing stronger and more powerful with every measure. The notes cascaded over each other like waves. They crashed and swelled and pulled back and crashed again. Kian did not think. He did not worry. He just played. He played every lonely night in his room. He played every ignored hello in the hallway. Played every tear his mother cried when she thought he was not looking. He played the silence of an empty apartment and the weight of being unseen. He played his fear and his hope and his hunger to be something more than invisible. The music poured out of him like it had been trapped inside for years, and now it was finally free. The piece built to its climax. The notes rang out louder and faster. Kian's hands flew across the keys with precision he did not know he had. And then the final chord. He let it hang in the air. He let it echo through the auditorium. He let it fade into silence. For a moment, nothing happened. The world stood still. Kian sat there with his hands on the keys and his eyes still closed. He was afraid to open them. He was afraid to see the audience staring at him with blank faces. He was afraid he had failed. But then he heard it, one person clapping, then another, then 10, then 100. Applause grew like a wave rising from the ocean. It crashed over him and wrapped around him and filled every corner of the room. Kian opened his eyes. People were standing. The entire auditorium was on its feet. Students he had never spoken to were cheering. Teachers were wiping their eyes. Somewhere in the back, a group of kids started chanting his name. He could not believe. I sat there frozen on the bench, unable to move. The spotlight was still on him, but it did not feel harsh anymore. It felt warm, like the sun breaking through clouds after a long storm. Mrs. Okafor was standing in the wings with tears streaming down her face. She was clapping harder than anyone, and somewhere in the middle of the crowd, a woman in a grocery store uniform was sobbing into her hands. It was his mother. She had come straight from work, still wearing her name tag. She had found a seat in the back where she thought he would not see her, but he saw her now. Their eyes met across the auditorium, and in that moment, no words were needed. She was proud of him. He had done. I had finally let himself be seen. The applause kept going, and Kian did not know what to do with himself. He had never experienced anything like this before. He stood up from the bench on shaky legs and gave a small, awkward bow. The crowd cheered even louder. He walked off the stage in a daze, like he was floating through a dream. The moment he stepped behind the curtain, Mrs. Okafor wrapped her arms around him. She held him tight and whispered that she knew he could do it. She said she had never been more proud of a student in her entire career. Other performers came up to congratulate him. The dancer, who had seemed so confident earlier, told him that was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard. The comedian shook his hand and said he had actual tears in his eyes. Even the violinist who performed right before him smiled and told him he deserved to win. Kian did not know how to respond to any of it. Had spent so long being ignored that he had forgotten how to accept kindness. He mumbled thank you over and over until the words stopped meaning anything. The final act went on, but Kian barely noticed. He stood backstage replaying every moment of his performance in his head. It really happened. Had he really done that? It felt like someone else had taken over his body and played, while he watched from far away. When all the acts were finished, the judges gathered to make their decision. Everyone lined up on stage to wait for the results. Kian stood at the end of the row, still feeling like he did not belong. Host took the microphone and started announcing the winners. Third place went to the comedy group. They jumped up and down and hugged each other. Second place went to the violinist. She smiled gracefully and accepted her trophy, and then the host paused. He looked at the card in his hand, and a huge grin spread across his face. He said, the first place winner had given one of the most emotional and unexpected performances in the history of this talent show. He said this person had come out of nowhere and reminded everyone what real music was supposed to feel like. And then he said Kian's name. The auditorium exploded. Kian stood frozen in place. He could not move. He could not breathe. Someone pushed him gently from behind, and he stumbled forward to accept the trophy. It was heavier than he expected, gold and shiny, with a little figure of a performer on top. The host shook his hand, and the crowd kept cheering. Kian looked out at all those faces, so many people he had walked past for years without ever speaking to. They were all looking at him now. They were all seeing him after the show ended. The auditorium emptied slowly. Parents found their kids. Friends took photos together. Teachers packed up their things. Kian walked off the stage and into the crowd. He was looking for one person. Found her standing near the back doors. His mother was waiting with red eyes and a smile so wide it looked like it might break her face. She did not say anything at first. She just pulled him into her arms and held him like she would never let go. They stood there for a long time. People walked past them and smiled. Some whispered about the quiet kid who won the whole thing, but Kian did not hear any of it all. He heard was his mother's heartbeat against his ear. Eventually, she pulled back and looked at him. She said she was sorry for missing so much. She said she wished she could have been there for all those years of practice. She said she should have paid more attention. Kian shook his head. He told her she had always been there. Every note she left on the counter, every hour she worked to keep a roof over their heads, every sacrifice she made so he could have a better life. That was being there. She started crying again, but this time they were happy tears. Someone tapped Kian on the shoulder. He turned around and saw a man he did not recognize. The man was older with gray hair and kind eyes behind round glasses. He introduced himself as a music professor from the university across town. Said he had come to the show because his niece was performing, but he stayed because of Kian. He told Kian that what he witnessed tonight was extraordinary. He said raw talent like that was rare, once in a generation, kind of rare. He asked if Kian had ever considered studying music seriously. Kian did not know what to say. He explained that he had taught himself on a broken keyboard. He said he had never had a real lesson in his life. The professor smiled and handed him a business card. He said he wanted to offer Kian free private lessons at the university. No cost, no strings attached. He said talent like this deserved to be nurtured. He said it would be a crime to let it go to waste. Kian looked at the card in his hand. Had the professor's name and phone number and the university logo. It felt like holding a ticket to another life. His mother put her hand on his shoulder and squeezed. She told him this was just the beginning. The next few weeks felt like a different world. At school, everything changed. People who had never spoken to Kian suddenly wanted to be his friend. They stopped him in the hallways and asked about his music. They invited him to sit with them at lunch. They followed him on social media and shared the video someone had recorded of his performance. That video spread faster than anyone expected. First, it was just students sharing it with each other. Then parents started sending it around. Then local news picked it up. Within a month, it had hundreds of thousands of views. Comments poured in from strangers all over the world. People said his music made them cry. People said they watched it over and over again. People said he inspired them to pick up instruments they had abandoned years ago. Kian did not know how to handle any of it. Fame was strange and uncomfortable. He still felt like the same invisible kid he had always been, but the world no longer saw him that way. He started taking lessons with the professor every Saturday morning. The university had a real grand piano in a beautiful practice room with tall windows. Kian would sit there for hours learning things he never knew existed: music theory and composition and technique. The professor pushed him hard, but always with kindness. Told Kian that discipline was the bridge between talent and greatness. Kian worked harder than he ever had before, practiced every day until his fingers could not move. He learned new pieces and wrote his own compositions. He started dreaming about a future he never thought possible: conservatory, concerts, recording studios, a life built around the thing he loved most. But even as everything changed, some things stayed the same. He still lived in that small apartment with the thin walls. He still climbed 3 flights of stairs because the elevator was still broken. He still kept the shoebox of notes under his bed, and he still played on that old keyboard with the missing keys. He could not bring himself to get rid of it. That keyboard had been his companion through the loneliest years of his life. It had heard every fear and every hope and every silent prayer. Getting rid of it would feel like abandoning a friend. One night a few months after the talent show, Kian sat at that keyboard and played softly. His mother was home for once. She sat on the edge of his bed and listened. When he finished, she told him something she had been holding on to for a long time. She said she had finally heard from his father. He had seen the video online. He wanted to reach out. He wanted to reconnect. Kian did not know how to feel about that. Part of him was angry. Where was his father for the past 10 years? Where was he during all those lonely nights? Where was he when they struggled to pay rent and buy groceries? But another part of him understood. Something people are complicated. They make mistakes. They run away from things they should face. Maybe his father was not so different from the boy who once hid in the back of every classroom. Maybe he was just scared too. Kian told his mother he was not ready to talk to him yet, but maybe someday. She nodded and kissed his forehead. She said that was okay. She said healing did not happen overnight. She said he had already come so far that night. Kian lay in bed and thought about everything. He thought about the broken keyboard and the empty hallways. He thought about Mrs. Okafor and the professor and the standing ovation. He thought about his mother working 2 jobs and still finding time to leave notes on the counter. He thought about the guitar pick still sitting on his nightstand. He realized something important being seen was not about fame or applause or viral videos. It was about letting people in. It was about showing the world who you really are, even when it feels terrifying. It was about trusting that you are enough. Kian was still quiet. He still preferred small groups over big crowds. He still liked eating lunch by himself, sometimes just to think. But he was no longer invisible. Not because everyone knew his name now, but because he finally knew his own worth. He had walked onto that stage as a ghost and walked off as someone real, someone who mattered, someone who had something to say, and he was just getting started. The world was wide open now, full of stages and pianos and people waiting to hear what he would play next. And for the first time in his life, Kian was not afraid to be heard. He was ready. He had always been ready. He just needed to believe it.